Good morning. As promised, I want to speak to you today about vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is feeling traumatized and having the symptoms of trauma when you're repeatedly hearing stories of other people's trauma, not having that trauma directly yourself. So in fact, becoming almost a secondary victim of that trauma. And the Victims of Crime Assistance Tribunal in Australia, in Victoria in particular, recognises secondary victims in its care packages. But we also need to do that in our own lives. Firstly, of course, I do supervise and guide and counsel many doctors, psychologists, clinical psychologists, barristers, lawyers, and others who experience vicarious trauma in the course of their work. Most commonly recognised, of course, are police, firefighters, ambulance staff. All those sorts of things are very easily recognised as experiencing vicarious trauma. We often don't think that lawyers, barristers, doctors, psychologists also experience vicarious trauma by hearing the repeated stories of their clients' or their patients' trauma. So what happens when you experience vicarious trauma? You might have ongoing feelings of anger, be really enraged, quite angry and sad about what's happened to your client or your patient. Or you might start to feel those angry, frustrated feelings directed to the world at large. And in doing that, you might become overly emotionally involved with someone else, experience guilt just for being part of the human race, that bystander guilt or shame, feelings of self-doubt that you're able to do anything to help people. You might be preoccupied with thoughts about the people whose stories you hear when you're outside of the work experience or in other places, not just when you're hearing their stories. So you might overly identify with them. You might really have a sense of horror, and you might end up having daydreams or nightmares about horror and rescue, those sorts of things, and experience a general sense of hopelessness, pessimism, cynicism in the world, a belief that the world's no longer a good place. And sometimes, without even thinking about it, what we might do is to then become distant, feel numb, detached. We might cut ourselves off from patients or from hearing their stories, or we might find that we cut ourselves off from other people as well, from people in our own world, perhaps go home and feel distance from our family members, from our kids, from our partners. And there might also be a difficulty in maintaining professional boundaries with the client, trying to overextend yourself to do more than your role is appropriate. And that's really important, that professionals who work in these areas recognise these signs and seek some guidance. But there's another way that people in the population are experiencing vicarious trauma. And that's particularly appropriate to consider during this time of the COVID-19 situation, pandemic that's around the world, and the lockdowns that are happening in various parts of the world, including here in Melbourne. People are traumatised by stories about COVID-19. People are traumatised by ongoing negativity, feeling it in themselves and hearing it from other people. How often do you go out for your allowed 2 hours of exercise and come across people who say, "Oh, isn't it terrible? I can't stand this anymore," repeatedly hearing the same thing. And you get caught up in that cycle and you develop a cynicism, a negativity, perhaps numbing, perhaps distance. You can't be bothered hearing it anymore, or you just perpetuate it. So these are the things that might indicate that as professionals or as people in the community, perhaps parents seeing and hearing their children's negativity, or children, more importantly, seeing and hearing their parents' repeated negativity as a result of their trauma or their catastrophization, their traumatized experience and traumatized expression of their experience, then become traumatized as well, when perhaps they would not be traumatized or their trauma would not be so extensive. So think about these things. The first step is to become aware. Are you a little numb? Are you angry? Is it out of proportion? Can you not get out of that negative cycle? Are you using catastrophic language to think about things and speak about things? If that's the case, then consider you might be experiencing vicarious trauma. In some of my future posts, I'll be talking about how to cope with vicarious trauma. Bye-bye, have a good day, and realize there is joy in the world. It's not all traumatic. So let's try and identify those things that are problematic for us, and then just go ahead and find the joy. God bless. Have a good day.